The peace of Christ be with you. This is a midweek reflection for Third Reformed Church on September 16th. And today, I come to you from the Third Reformed courtyard. Throughout this pandemic experience, I feel like there's been a handful of themes that I keep returning to. And one of them is the restorative power of nature. God created us to be a part of the rest of the natural world, not apart from it. And yet, so much of our modern life has created this gap between us and the natural world that we live in and that we depend on for food and clean air and water. It hasn't always been that way. Most societies, including the one that Jesus was a part of, were much more agrarian. There was a closer connection to the earth, to where food came from, to the weather patterns. It wasn't so easy to live in isolation from all of that, which our modern urban lives has afforded us the opportunity to do. If we want to, we can walk through life pretty well oblivious of what's going on in the rest of the natural order. So when I consider that Jesus lived in a society that had a closer connection to the earth, it doesn't really shock me that so many of his teachings draw on those themes. I mean, just think about how many of his parables have to do with stuff like wheat and vineyards, sheep. All of it's tied in with the natural world. One of the places that Jesus gives some teaching that connects to that is in what we call the Sermon on the Mount from Matthew. He says this in chapter 5. Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or what you will drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? And can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your span of life? And why do you worry about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, and yet I tell you, even Solomon in all of his glory was not clothed like one of these. In addressing the worries, the concerns, the anxieties, the fears that so often can dominate our hearts and minds, Jesus encourages us to pay attention to the natural world around us. Look at the birds of the air. Consider the lilies of the fields. They have things to teach us. There are lessons to be learned. There are examples to be followed about being fully present, rooted and grounded right here where you are, and trusting that God, who has created all things and called all things good, will continue to provide and sustain all that is truly needed. And I think in a season like we are living through right now, that reminder is so incredibly important. There are so many things that can create worry, can raise anxiety, can drive concern right now. And I can't help but think that if Jesus were here right alongside us, he'd say, maybe pay a little less attention to your Facebook feed. Maybe don't consider the opinions of every pundit who's on cable TV. How about we don't fill every hour of your day with this compulsive consumption of information, of opinion, of worry and anxiety and fear? Because as much as I hate to admit it, so much of media in our world these days is driven by fear. It's what gets people to click on a link, to read an article, to stay tuned in. Oftentimes stories are presented in such a way that it taps into our greatest anxiety and fear. So I'm not encouraging us to remain ignorant of what's happening in the world around us. Absolutely the opposite. I think as Christians we need to be informed people of what's going on in the world. But there's a difference between remaining informed of the facts of what's happening and obsessively and compulsively giving our attention to the endless stream of opinions and commentaries and editorial comments about it all, to get tied up in knots, wondering what's going to happen at the next election, what the next guidelines from the state are going to look like, if there's going to be college football or not. Right? I think there is still a deep and profound wisdom in taking some of our attention away from that almost compulsive pull to stay invested in the source of our anxiety and worry, and to instead look at the birds of the air. I mean, really look at them. Pay attention to the slow, patient, gentle movements of a great blue heron in flight. Pay attention to the way that even the common sparrows in your backyard are connected to one another. Consider the lilies of the field, or the butterfly bush, which is still getting traffic from monarchs, or the last ripening tomatoes in your garden as summer starts moving into fall. Take time to get outside, to pay attention and listen and learn from the natural world around us, to see the way in which the plants and the animals of the created world are so fully present right where they are, where they have all that they need provided in each day as each day's needs arise. So I would encourage you again, as I have so many times throughout these weekly reflections or midweek reflections the past half of a year now, to find space to unplug, to turn off the news, to put down the phone, to set aside the worries that can drive this anxious cycle of fear within you, and to just immerse yourself as part of this amazing, beautiful, miraculous creation that God has given to us. Learn from our fellow creatures. Listen to the sounds of the wind in the trees, the animals that surround you. Take space to learn those lessons of patient dependence, confident trust, and loving care from our God, who has been faithful for generations past, is faithful in this moment, and will continue to be faithful in the days and weeks and years to come.